Is therapy not enough? This woman closed down her thriving multiple six-figure therapy practice after being in the industry for over 20 years, and the reasons why are very interesting. What secrets do the body hold that we are unable to access through the traditional Western methods? And where can we find the methods that will bring us to our truest sense of happiness and freedom? We'll be diving into that and more today. Welcome to another episode of Shattering Reality. I am your host, Sabrina Weibel, and on this podcast, we break through the common limitations of modern reality and expand your thinking as we delve into topics of quantum physics, spirituality, channeling, and much more. Nothing is off the table here as we work to uncover human behavior and the secret powers of the mind and universe through discussing esoteric and sometimes controversial topics. Today, we went beyond the realms of traditional therapy and coaching with the wise Carah Elizabeth, who calls herself a therapist gone rogue. With over 2 decades of experience in clinical psychology, Carah has delved into the depths of human psyche, only to realize there is a whole new paradigm of healing and empowerment that remains untouched by the general public. As we peel back the layers of conventionality, prepare to explore the realms of wisdom that lives in our bodies as we go into the uncharted territories of the self in this episode of Shattering Reality. If you're loving this podcast, the best way to show your love is to leave a 5-star review and share it with a friend so that more people can benefit from hearing these topics. And with that being said, let's get into it. Hi, Carah. It's so nice to have you on the show.
Hello, thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I'm just honored that you asked me to join you.
Yeah, I'm very interested in your story of being so successful in your therapy business for over 20 years and then making the switch over to what a lot of people might call quote unquote woo woo of going into somatics and breath work and all of these inner modalities.
hmm
Just jumping right into it, I'm really curious on what your story is. What led you up to the decision to quit your multi six-figure therapy business and start up your own holistic practice?
Yeah, so great question. And I love having this conversation because it really just is expanding beyond our comfort zones, is really what this is all about for me. In 2019, I was living my best life. I had a multi six figure private practice with therapists, 3 therapists under me. We were doing great. We were booked out 6 months in advance. And in August of 2019, I attended a networking event, a women's networking event, and a friend had spoken on stage. And we were walking out, and I said, you were in the middle of your conversation, your speech, and I just realized what I had to do. And she said, "What's that?" I said, "I need to close my private practice." And she just stared at
Mm.
me, and we just stared at each other. I'm like, I don't even know why. I'm like, I just feel it in my bones that this is not what I'm meant to be doing anymore. Like, I'd mastered it, I had accomplished it. It was a goal I'd had since I was 14, but I never reevaluated it. And what had been happening in the years leading up to that decision was I started doing deep inner work because as I was building this practice and having this success, I recognized some patterns coming up of my own stuff that needed to be healed. And I'd been in therapy since I was, 14 on and off, and that had been great. But I realized that there was something deeper that needed to be addressed. So I went inward. I started the deep
Mm.
embodiment, the deep somatic, the deep breath work, the sound healing, all of the things, and I was doing deep energy work for myself and becoming a Reiki master. And I was feeling better. And I was feeling like more of a sense of belonging in myself. So I was having some deep healing of my chakra, my energy systems that just weren't accessible through therapy itself. And that's
Mm.
how I really knew that like this needed to go beyond the traditional talk therapy and bring it into the body, bring it into the energy systems to really have that holistic healing effect. And if it was working for me, it could work for my clients as well.
Right. And therapy is something that I feel has become more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's become more common. People talk about therapy so much more often than
hmm
they did before. And I feel like that's people's most common is when somebody is struggling with something, they say, oh, just go to therapy.
hmm
Why do you feel like, as now a therapist gone rogue, like, how do you challenge those, like, the conventional approaches to therapy? Like, what do you feel like are now from going to therapy to these holistic methods, what do you believe are really the limitations of the traditional therapeutic modalities, and how does also your holistic approach address those limitations?
Yeah. So let's be clear. Like, I love therapy. Therapy is still so necessary in this world. And it in itself, the field in itself, is revolutionizing. And that's what I want to be a part of. I work with a lot of therapists now, not to have to leave their private practice. That's not what I'm telling anybody to do. If that feels right for you, great. That's felt right for me. But how we can revolutionize the field, because as therapists, we are trained in these modalities that are 100 years old. They just
Mm,
aren't like relevant to today all of the time. Yes, can they be supportive in some areas? Of course. I still practice them with clients, some of the different modalities, but they're not all inclusive. They're addressing psyche, which is our mind. They're addressing the mental space and at times touching the emotional space. But the majority of the modalities really are like, you become emotional, so let's deal with the mind. And that's ultimately
mm,
what trauma does, is trauma disconnects us from our body. So if we're using these conventional modalities that are just addressing the mind, we're missing the connection to the body, which means we're not deeply healing the core and the root of the trauma or the emotional experiences that are held within the body. So the way that I do this is I really, again, in Eastern philosophy, in yogic philosophy, we deal with the koshas, which are, the physical body, the mental, emotional body, the spiritual body, the bliss body. And so I really take this approach of dealing with the energy centers of the chakras and the koshas of, let's take care of the body, the physical body, their needs to be met before we can deepen into the emotional, the mental, the spiritual body to really find whole healing, whole being healing.
mm. That's beautiful. And I'm curious with your title as a body wisdom coach.
Mhm.
People might hear that and wonder what exactly that is. And as we're talking about these different like bodies of the emotional body, I think you said bliss body. I'm curious what that is. Could you walk us through the concepts of body wisdom and these different bodies that we have that people can start integrating?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have all of these energies, and whether you believe in the Eastern philosophy or not, it doesn't matter what you call it. But for me, again, body wisdom really is that internal, innate intelligence of the body. And we call it intuition. I call it body wisdom. Some people call it that gut reaction, that gut feeling that you have, that you don't know why you feel like you shouldn't do this, but you just shouldn't do it, or whatever that might be. And that's really what we're accessing. We're really stopping the pattern of seeking outside of ourselves for the answer and really directing ourselves inward. Like, what feels good in my body? Because
Mm,
so many of us do things that we're told to do that just don't feel in alignment with us. And that's when we have such a disconnect. That's when we have such we create problems in our lives for ourselves, or they come to us because we're not connecting to our body's wisdom and what feels good for us in our body. So that's really what this is accessing. It's peeling back all of the layers of those learned beliefs, those messages from society, culture, religion, parents, family, whatever it might be, to get to that core of who you are, um, and to trust that your body's going to tell you what you need. And you have to build that trust with your body, that then your body will open to you and tell you these things because it trusts that you're going to give it to it, rather than
mm.
just keep it, rather than keep ignoring it.
And I think that's something that as a whole, as a human race as a whole, we
Mhm.
could benefit so much from implementing and integrating. You know, being our own leaders, listening to our own innate intelligence, our own wisdom within, rather than taking orders from whoever else.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, as you talk about this, in what ways would you say are the best if someone wanted to start developing this trust within themselves, how would you suggest to go about that?
That's a beautiful question, and it can be a bit challenging for a lot of people, because what I really encourage people do, and where I always start with people, is Muladhara, the root chakra, which is the sense of safety,
Mhm.
stability, strength, groundedness. And so often in our world, we are so go, 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 go. There's so much noise around us, social media, work, family, like so many obligations. But the real place to start is to get
Mm.
quiet and to get still. And it doesn't have to be for a long time. Um, But it's just creating the pattern of every day of finding some stillness and quietness. And it can be also just like a gentle, leisurely walk without your earbuds in. How many of us are ever in silence, right? But being able to tune in with the nature around you, listening to the birds, listening to the wind through the trees, feeling the sun on your skin, really tapping into the physical space and presence that you're in that moment to start to feel that calming and that quieting down from the world around us.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that will help us to listen to that inner wisdom.
Yeah, it will help to connect us with the subtle body, these subtle energies that we so often miss because we're looking outside of ourselves or everything. We've got something in our ear, or the TV's on, or whatever is going on around us that's preventing us from really feeling and tapping into the subtle body energy.
And I'm curious as well, talking about the energies and focusing on the root first. Why is it that you would want to focus on that root first?
Because so many of us are visionaries, and especially when we're talking about
Mm.
entrepreneurship and building a business, we have so many visions going on. But if we cannot bring that energy down to this earth plane, nothing's going to happen. So we really need to be grounded in the present as well as be lifted up to the visions. And so we need this solid connection between the earth and the infinite wisdom or potential of the universe, so that we can bring things down to the earth plane, so they don't just live in our heads for so long. And
Mm.
then we get become frustrated because we can't seem to make it come down to the earth. Well, that's probably because you're not very grounded. You're not really rooted in your sense of self. It also comes from that place of so many of us are seeking safety, and we seek it from outside of ourselves. We think that if we make six figures, we're going to feel safe and secure, or if we have a house, or if we have whatever. But safety really comes from feeling safe within ourselves. And the only way we can feel safe within ourselves is if we're rooted and we're connected to our body and to ourselves. And so we
Hmm.
do that by, again, taking care of the body and getting connected to listening to what it needs and giving it what it needs: food, water, rest, shelter, those basic human needs. That then we can go deeper into the felt sense awareness, the emotions, the mind, and the intelligence of the body.
Mm. And I feel like that's something that the vast majority of people could use and need, is that integrating that sense of safety and like groundedness in the present. Like, how many people do we know? I mean, you as a ex-therapist, how many people are like walking around so anxious, like depressed out of their minds, dealing with so many just in their heads. All of their energy is just up here. I feel like we really do need to integrate that healthy, I guess you would say,
Mhm.
root of feeling that
Absolutely.
sense of presence and groundedness and emphasis on the safety within yourself.
Mhm.
Going a little deeper into this, just because I feel like it could really benefit our audience, is we talked about building trust to tune out of the noise, tune into yourself and those subtle nudges that you might be receiving.
Mhm.
Building safety, how would you suggest about creating that sense of safety within yourself?
Yeah, so the biggest part of that is to meet your basic physical needs. So many of us are skipping meals, drinking coffee instead of having breakfast, or not moving our body every day. So many of us are getting so busy and so wrapped up in our work, even as coaches, even as therapists, even as
Mm.
entrepreneurs. We are so focused on helping our clients, but then we're not taking our own advice sometimes. We're not taking our own action steps for ourselves, because then we're collapsing under our couches at the end of the day, so exhausted. And so by really making sure that we are meeting the needs, again, that will open up, that will help the body feel safe to open up and let us go deeper. So when I was doing
Mm.
traditional therapy in the eating disorder realm, doing trauma work, our focus at the basic level of eating disorder care for the high acuity clients was to get them to a medically stable space. So we couldn't do any deep therapy work as long as we were trying to refeed their bodies to get them back into a medically stable state. We're no different than that. We may be at a healthy weight. We may not be having some of the problems or complications that the women I worked with in the eating disorder realm do, but that doesn't mean we're meeting our own basic needs. We may be eating too much sugar, too much gluten, too much of whatever that our body doesn't like. I know for me, again, I've had a little too much sugar. It's my birthday week, so I've had a little bit of cake and cookies and things like that. But I start to feel it in my system of like, oh, a little bit more foggy. I'm struggling with a little bit more congestion because of these things that I know aren't great for me. It doesn't mean I can't ever have them, but I don't need to be eating them as often as I have been recently. And so just
Mm,
starting to know what your body really thrives on and what it really struggles and gets sluggish and is trying to overwork itself to compensate for, and being able to meet those needs so that it can feel safe to let you go deeper. Because if it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel like its needs are being met, it's always going to be in survival mode of trying to get its needs met.
I love that. And continuing to listen to, I feel like that's having just a very strong awareness of what your body does like and doesn't like. I feel like we're so prone to, oh, it's food, I'm just going to eat it. Oh, this is, whatever. Oh, I'm running late, I'm just going to skip breakfast, rather than listening to the body is literally saying, hey, I'm hungry. Hey,
Hmm.
I'm starving now. Or
Yeah.
this food is making me break out into these rashes, and you're just,
Hmm.
continuing to eat it. It's making you inflamed. Listening to that intelligence.
Absolutely. And the same with rest. Rest is such an important piece
Mm,
to our journey of feeling safe in our bodies. If our body is exhausted because we're sleeping 2 hours a night, or, we're staying up super late, or any of that, or even just spending too much time on the computer, which we all do anymore, um, it's going to try to get that need for rest met by, sometimes it's getting sick. Sometimes that's just being so exhausted and end up burning out and like I said, collapsing onto your couch at the end of the day because you're physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted.
mm, yeah. And I'm thinking of this also in reference to like the physical safety, but also what are your thoughts in terms of emotional safety? Those people who have had the traumas where they don't feel emotionally safe, how would you suggest to go about feeling safety in those senses?
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be taking it a step inward, right? So once our body feels safe to open up to tell us
Mm,
that we don't feel emotionally safe, then we can start to address that. As then we discuss like what's going on in our environment. Is it the people we're around? Is it the work that we are doing or where we're working? Is it um, a space? Is it, the home or the place that you live in that feels unsafe? And then we can start to address that and become aware of that. Because a lot of times you're not really you don't really understand why you don't feel safe emotionally. And that's because your body's trying to get its physical needs met first. And then it can open to let you know of those emotional safety things. And that's when we really seek out other therapists or coaches, um, and start to make those shift in our life to feel emotionally safe, which some of us don't
mm,
even know what that feels like, have never maybe even felt emotionally safe. So we have to kind of learn what the difference between emotional and physical safety is. And we can do that by becoming a little bit more educated on our nervous system dynamics and starting to track what's going on with the different states of the nervous system. When did I go into fight or flight and what was happening around that time? So I can start to become aware
mm,
of, hey, these are things that activate my fight or flight response. That's great information. Now I can become aware and start to explore those things a little bit differently and a little bit deeper
mm.
to start to connect the dots between what's going on now and where it's stemming from the past.
I'm loving this conversation because it's so different than the traditional way.
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of times the traditional therapy, like you said, it can be superficial, just speaking of in the mind and not taking it to that level. And I'm wondering for what your thoughts are on of like, how do you see the future of mental health and wellness really evolving to incorporate more of these holistic approaches?
Yeah, what I'm seeing, and if you follow any therapists on social media, or maybe if you have your own, you may be noticing this shift, but there has been a shift for including mindfulness and including meditation. So there are therapists that are waking up to this process, waking up to their education not being enough and getting additional support from other alternative modalities. And this wasn't really a thing even 5 years ago when I made that decision to leave the field. Now I did work in the field through 2020, but I stopped in 2020 was when I closed my practice officially. Um, but that's what we're seeing is that so many therapists are adding, whether it's yoga, whether it's breath work, whether it's somatic experiencing, they're adding additional practices to their skill set to support their clients. And I
Mm.
think the more that therapists do this, and the more that therapists expand outside of the traditional um, education system, the more that I'm hoping the education system will start to follow suit and recognize, like, hey, we maybe we do need to explore adding additional modalities because right now anything that's not quote unquote empirically studied is not deemed an effective tool, a therapeutic tool. So even somatic experiencing, which has been around since the 70s, is not has not been studied to have empirical evidence of its benefit for trauma work, even though
Mm.
it, Peter Levine has done research and has seen the positive effects on trauma that his somatic experiencing program has.
Mm. And that's something that I've seen so often too in the holistic health world is just not having the research to back it. It's all the people, tons and tons of people who have experienced like, my life has changed. I feel amazing. I feel healed. And then it's like, the people who want the evidence are like, oh, but there's no research. And it's a lot of times it's because the research may not be funded for these holistic practices.
Exactly. It's not funded is one thing. And again, because the traditional education system is the way that it is, that's where the research is. That's where the funds
Hmm.
are located, and that's where it's earmarked to go. Um, so I mean that's exactly what's happening. And to be honest, I don't know that the holistic field is really that interested of needing to have the research to back it up
Mm.
because we're like, if it works, it works. Like, why do we need somebody else to tell us it works? So it works. And so there's just a different level of what is important to this community. And that is really to see the healing benefits of it without
Hmm.
needing to prove ourselves to anybody.
Yeah, I
So
love that.
it's a more feminine energy versus the traditional education system being much more masculine.
Hmm. And as someone who's experienced both of the traditional therapy and the holistic coaching, what do you believe are the key differences in terms of the outcomes between the two?
Um, so the traditional mental health field and traditional therapy really focuses on the past, focuses on resolving the issues from the past. With coaching, we are much more focused on moving forward. So yes, we address past dynamics as they arise, past patterns, but the number one thing when I left my practice and I was referring my clients out, they're like, I don't want to start all over. And I would say, you don't have to start all over. Start from here. As stuff comes up
Mhm.
from the past, you talk about it, but you don't need to go back over with a new therapist everything that happened in your childhood that we've already addressed at this level. Know that it will come up as you move to the next level, though, and you'll peel back that next layer and you'll address it in that moment. And so that's a big difference. Whereas coaching, we always talk about like, what are we working towards? What are we looking at? What is that vision for the future? And how are we closing that gap to get you there? So, yes, some patterns from the past are going to come up, but we're focused so much more on the future.
And as someone who's built a successful multi six-figure private practice, what advice would you give to therapists or coaches who are considering to step outside of the traditional roles and explore alternative approaches?
So as a therapist, we have to do so many hours of like continuing education. We have to do so much education and get so many degrees. So we're very focused on like, what certificate can I get next? That's kind of our
Mm.
focus. And when therapists come to me, when other coaches come to me and they ask me what certificate can they get next or what somatic program or what, embodiment program or whatever, I always say, I don't recommend any programs to you. I recommend you start doing the work for yourself first. You feel the benefits of what works well for you, what then ignites a passion within you, and then you get the training if you want to
Mhm.
pursue it deeper. But so much of this work really starts with us going deeper, because one of the shocking facts of being a therapist is you don't have to have ever gone to therapy to be a therapist. So there are a lot of therapists out there that may have gone to therapy in their youth or their childhood, but then they just decided to become a therapist and they got their education, but they didn't ever do more work.
Mhm.
And we can only, one of the things I like to say, and I know I heard it years and years ago and really resonate with it, we can only guide our clients as deep as we've gone ourselves. And we can only grow as tall as we've gone deep. And so we really have to be that model of I'm going deeper so I can then take clients deeper. But I have to go first. I have to lead the way.
That is so important. And
Mhm.
I feel so on point with even people getting into coaching, and all due respect to everyone, but I work with a lot of coaches as well, and a lot of them will say similar things. I'm just wanting to get, the next certification, the next title to make themselves feel like they're more qualified when really their
Mhm.
qualification is their own work in themselves.
Absolutely. Like we feel more confident with more letters behind our name, but doesn't matter how many letters behind your name is. If you haven't done the work yourself, you don't know how it feels to do the work, you're not going to feel confident in it,
Hmm.
because then you're just regurgitating information that you learned.
Right. And it's really that embodiment that people are really needing right now, not more
Yes.
information. We have so much information. We have access to so much information. We need the people who are living it, who are embodying it.
Exactly. Absolutely. And that's why what I do is, embodied life and business coaching for that reason is we need to be embodying these things for ourselves
Hmm.
to then be able to go out into the world and share our passion and our gifts.
That's beautiful. I always love to ask this question at the end
Mhm.
of all my interviews. And if you were to share one sentence on how you believe we could make the world a better place collectively as a human race, what would it be?
Do your own work.
Mm,
Focus on you. Focus on healing yourself instead of trying to heal or change everybody else around you. Do your own work.
yes, ma'am. I 1,000% agree. Well, it's been so great to have you on, Kara. This conversation was amazing. I really feel like more people need to have access to this information and know that there are so many other methods and modalities than the traditional Western therapy that really doesn't go as deep as we need as humans with our whole emotional spectrum. So
Mhm.
I'd love for the audience to have access to how to contact you, your socials, any links that you'd love to offer. Feel free to share them now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm most active on Instagram. So it's at Carah.Elizabeth, and my name will be properly spelled in the show notes, I'm sure.
Yes,
As well as my website is CarahElizabeth.com, and you can always reach out to me there. And there's a contact button as well.
perfect. Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure,
Yeah.
and we will
Yeah.
talk
Thank you.
again soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great.
Thank you again for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please right now give it a 5-star review, sharing what you love most about this podcast. It helps to bring in new ears to these types of conversations that are helping our communities grow and making the world a better place. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next episode of Shattering Reality.